Next we'll have Sophia, who is also a member of the law. Hey everybody, thank you for coming out today. So Kata asked me to talk a little bit about the histories of forced sterilization within the context of the United States. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So throughout the history, forced sterilizations have been used as a means of controlling undesirable populations, immigrants, people of color, poor people, unmarried mothers, the disabled, the mentally ill, and programs of forced sterilization have been federally funded throughout the history of this country, across the country in 32 different states. The first laws that approved of forced sterilization was the first legal policies was thought to be Bell case in 1927, which came up against the Supreme Court, which approved forced sterilizations and public funding of forced sterilizations. This case led to the sterilization of 65,000 Americans with mental illness or developmental disabilities from the 1920s to the 1970s, and that court ruling still stands to this day. A lot of people reference Fannie Lou Hamer when we think about this phrase that everybody says a lot in movement spaces: nobody's free until everybody's free. The movement work that Fannie Lou Hamer did was to fight against the Mississippi appendectomy, which actually was forced sterilizations of black women who were seeking care and were told that they were getting an appendectomy and walked out of the hospital without the ability to reproduce. And so today we stand here reminded of this legacy as we learn of the forcing of sterilization of women of color within detention centers in Georgia. So we recognize that this practice has a long history within prisons and outside of prisons. When we think about the medical systems that Indigenous folks in the US and Canada have to navigate, women have also been forced into sterilization procedures as late as the year 2018. More sterilization of Indigenous people has been funded by the Indian Health Services in the history of the U.S. and continues to happen in Canada as well within their services. Over 1,000 Indigenous women have been sterilized in Canada. Were sterilized in Canada between 1966 and 1976. Anywhere from 25 to 50% of the Indigenous women of reproductive age in the U.S. were sterilized in the 1970s. The U.S. also has occupied territory of Puerto Rico, and between 1936 and 1968, nearly a third of women in the U.S. territory were sterilized in a similar effort. There are also documented efforts of sterilization of Latinx women in Los Angeles that were revealed around the same time in the 1970s. A lawsuit in 1974 by the Southern Poverty Law Center was filed on behalf of 2 black women who were sterilized under a federally funded program, and that lawsuit ended the promotion of sterilization by the U.S. federal government. However, it didn't outlaw the policy. And most recently, when we think about sterilization, we see articles and news come out regarding sterilization within prisons. Most notably in California in 2013 or 2014, a law had to be passed to ban the sterilization of inmates without their consent, after reports were revealed that sterilization had happened between 2004 and 2013. Over 150 women were sterilized forcibly. But again, we continue to recognize that these policies, there will always be pushed back by the government. In May 2017, a judge in Tennessee received or put forward a policy that would give inmates 30 days off of their time if they undergo a birth control procedure. And 32 women received birth control, and 38 men were also awaiting vasectomies. So we think about this. When we think about this, we're thinking about eugenics. We're thinking about the ways in which people of color, poor people, mentally disabled people have had their rights forcibly taken away or coercively taken away without their consent. And when I'm really thinking about this issue, I'm thinking about the fact that the environment of the prisons and the environment of the detention centers is set up to limit the rights of the people inside and to remove their humanity and treat them as less than human. So we can ban unsavory practices by law, but we cannot prevent a system that was built to do these practices without getting rid of the system entirely. That's the only way, right? So when we talk about this work, we're talking about shutting down prisons, abolishing ICE, abolishing detention centers, and taking people out of cages. So I want to thank y'all for coming out today, and we're going to caravan to bring attention to this issue, to mark this moment, to say that we do not stand by the dehumanization of our people in our community, and we will not allow these practices to continue within our community. Thank you, Sophia.